everyone, and welcome back to the Don Lemon Show. I hope you had a great Memorial weekend. We're kicking off the post-Memorial Day news cycle with some very huge updates for you. I'm sure you're aware, but if you're not, closing statements have now begun in the former President Donald Trump's hush money trial. Yes, we have a former president who is on trial. Here to talk about the end of the first criminal trial for a sitting U.S. president, a former sitting U.S. president, Democratic political strategist Rachel Bitecofer. She's also the author of Hit 'em Where It Hurts. Also joined by defense attorney, joined again, I should say, because he's becoming a regular on this program, defense attorney and legal analyst Mark Eiglarsh. Thanks to both of you for joining. How are you doing?
Great.
Choosing to be wonderful, Don.
Great. Choosing to be wonderful and choosing to be happy, as you say, as your book says. Mm-hmm. So, Mark, I'm going to start with you. As I mentioned, these are closing statements. They're ongoing now as we are recording this for the former first president's trial. What are you expecting to hear from Trump's defense team?
That they didn't prove the case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, that they relied upon somebody who's got tremendous defects in character, who can't keep his story straight. He's a convicted perjurer, and you have to believe him in order to find Trump guilty, is the defense's argument. And I would also say in the worst case scenario, they proved maybe he was in the weeds with Cohen, maybe he's guilty, probably guilty is not enough. It's beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, and it's much bigger than Donald Trump. It's every single defendant enjoys that presumption of innocence that only gets taken away when the state or the government proves their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mark, you're going against much of what I've heard. I mean, I have heard some people say, I don't think they've proved it, but most people say, you know what, I think they have, and this case doesn't really reside or on what's his name, Michael Cohen, to be proven innocent or guilty.
Which is a comment on how bad the news has become, because I've done a lot of Fox News hits, and I sit there and I listen, and all their analysts say exactly what I just said. And, on the other side, it's amazing how you can't get the right facts. Yeah. I believe that the argument on the defense side is that, yes, Trump said make all this happen, but he doesn't get in the weeds with his lawyer. Cohen does whatever he's supposed to do now because he's a Mr. Fix-It. Cohen then says, no, it was we. Donald knew everything I was doing. He knew of the arrangement. He knew that what he was doing was nefarious. He had the right state of mind to prove this case, that it was fraud. I think that relies upon the testimony of Cohen. I believe that. And then the other thing is, I'm still waiting. What was the purpose of the fraudulent documents in terms of what crime was he concealing or committing? Election interference? What does that mean? I still do not know, and it comes down to the jury instructions. What does interference versus influence mean? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
What do you expect to hear from the prosecution?
We have proven this case beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt. We didn't even need Cohen to prove the case. See how I can argue out of both sides of my mouth. It's very clear that Donald Trump knew what he was doing. He wanted to pay off Stormy Daniels so that it would not in any way affect his election chances. This is an easy, cut and dry case.
Do you expect these arguments to have any major effect on the jury, or do you think that they've made up their minds just from the witnesses and the evidence in the testimony?
This case is unique. Murder, rape, child molestation, they know those things. They know the elements. They know what's legal, what's not. And at this point, closing argument really doesn't sway them as much as it would in a case like this, where they're still trying to figure out what exactly needs to be proven. What exactly is the extra crime that gets it to the felony, and what the language that will flow from the prosecutor's lips to help explain to them that the elements were met. I think closing arguments are critical.
So, Rachel, let's get to what the people are thinking. This is your bailiwick here. As this trial comes to a close, Americans are, I'm surprised because I didn't think they were in the beginning, they're increasingly viewing Donald Trump as guilty. According to a CBS News poll last week, about 56% of Americans believe Trump is guilty. What do you think it was that convinced them?
Well, I don't think it was that they were watching the trial, unfortunately. I mean, granted, we're not actually watching it from the courtroom, but we're getting the equivalent of live reporting out of that courtroom. And the interest has been fairly low in the public. Here's the problem with Donald Trump and any defense attorney that signs up their career and their reputation to help him. The data doesn't lie, right? I mean, he's not Don Corleone. He's not committing crimes really in a smart way. He's leaving huge paper trails. He leaves witnesses. He's not a good criminal. And when you get to court, that's where, the rubber hits the road. And that's why their victory total is basically 0 to 64 in court. And that's not even counting the Jan 6 stuff, the Roger Stone stuff, all of that. So ultimately, I think the conviction will matter here. I think it will matter a little bit in that swing voter bucket where we hear people on the stump talking about, maybe if he's convicted, it would affect their vote choice. But this trial is not going to have the same effect that something like the Jan 6 trial or the documents case would have, because as Mark just pointed out very brilliantly in his fake defense close, it seems trivial to other people, right? So there's a way to trivialize a criminal conviction here that isn't possible with the other trials, and that's why it's unfortunate that the wheels of justice have been used to slow them down.
Mark, what about you? We've talked about this before. Do you think it's swaying? Because at first they weren't even paying attention, and I think it was maybe you who said, as we get closer to a verdict, you believe that more people would start paying attention to it. Why do you think that more people are convinced now that he's guilty than when it started?
I think that people are listening to other people. People are very easily influenced. Look, I'm not in the courtroom. So if I'm being candid with you, I'm reading what reporters are saying are happening in the courtroom.
Yeah. That's why there should be cameras, but I'm sorry, go on.
I agree. I agree. Even when I watch the footage, I still feel like I'm still at an arm's distance because I'm not there in the courtroom and I'm not watching the jurors and how they're responding. So now I'm relying upon reporters, with all due respect to reporters, who are doing the best they can at their level of awareness to capture what they think was said in court and then put that down for me to read. And so people are just watching what then the talking heads are saying. And many of them have political agendas and aren't then reporting what's going on in the courtroom fairly and accurately. They're just swinging, how they want the public to swing.
Yeah. Well, surprise, surprise, Rachel. Republicans appear to be less certain than Democrats, right? Only half of them say that Donald Trump is definitely guilty and definitely in quotes. Do you think that there is any room for this trial to sway any Republican voters, or do you think that the lines have already been drawn here?
Well, I make a distinction between Republican voters and then the MAGA condition, the MAGA coalition.
Agree, 100%. Agree,
70% though of the party. Okay,
yeah.
So we're talking about 30% are what we would call Republicans, traditional Republicans. Here's the problem. Mark just pointed it out. It's the information. Like, the Nazis thought in the 1930s they had to own the entire media system and control it to get people to digest propaganda. 100 years later, we figured out actually people will opt into propaganda. They'll opt into an information silo if they have the option, and the digital world gives them that ability. So when you look at like your average Republican, the news consumption that they're willing to do is Fox News, Wall Street Journal, stuff like that. You're going to have a very minimized attention on all of Trump's criminal elements. I mean, that's why people on that side are going to be genuinely shocked when he is convicted, because the narrative in right-wing media is that he's an innocent man who did nothing wrong, is being hounded by the judicial system.
But you know what, Rachel? It's not just right-wing media. I mean, I'm fairly new to this streaming world, and a lot of folks in this streaming world, including young people, feel the same way, and it's because I believe of what they're digesting from streaming and social media, etc.
I started my career teaching people to be skeptical about corporate media, media consolidation
and the government,
biases in media.
John,
I closed my teaching career teaching people. Actually, mainstream news has an editorial process that doesn't exist in the streamerverse, right? There's no editorial that says you have to fact check this. Oh, you can't prove it. You can't go on air with it, right? So we really are in a situation where about 30-40 million Americans are on an information diet that has created a false reality where Joe Biden stole the election, COVID vaccines kill you. Joe Biden is a pedophile. Didn't you guys know that? I know that because I hang out on Twitter a lot. MAGA is definitely, you know, on a really strict propaganda diet. And they don't even know that Trump has lied to them about the big lie because of that. It's never been reported on Fox.
You're Rachel, you're 100% right. I'll let you jump in, Mark, but I want to talk about that because I've noticed that the facts don't matter. And I mean, this is a huge percentage of the voting public who actually believe this. Now, I don't know if these young people or whatever are going to go to the polls. That you know, the history shows that they don't for the most part. But it's exactly what you said. They don't believe that, they don't trust the government. They think the vaccine kills people. They think that it was all a big conspiracy to take your money from big pharma, et cetera, and so on and so on and so on. And that Joe Biden is a pedophile. You're right. And
Yes.
they believe that Donald Trump this trial is legitimate and everybody's out to get him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. And when we talk about, you know, I'm here 6 months out trying to keep us from collapsing into a fascist regime in November, working on democratic strategy. And that's what the book's all about. But the reason that work is so important, folks, is because we have not, as a country, come to terms with the fact that we have a mass psychosis event. It is not a difference of opinion on whether Joe Biden stole the election. It is there's never been a more vetted election. They went looking for fraud. He paid for 2 studies for fraud, found 0 fraud. So it's not just that we didn't find fraud. We went and looked, and there is no fraud. And yet the basis for 40 million people going into the ballot box this November is going to be on the assumption that we stole democracy from them. And that's why we're in a very dangerous position.
Well, you need to talk to Democrats because they're not getting that message out. And also, and even the folks who are in the White House, you need to talk to them because they keep going on, traditional media, legacy media, thinking that's going to make the difference. And it's not. I'm telling you, it's going to be in streaming and it's going to be on social media. It's really going to make the difference because there are a lot of folks out there who are believing in, on websites and on, podcasts or whatever that don't have to abide by what traditional media has to abide by. And that's standards and practices and facts. So they're up against it. Mark, what did you want to say? I'm sorry.
So I have a question for both of you. I respect both of you immensely. You've been following this trial. Okay, let's assume for a moment that Trump is found guilty of the felony. Explain to me what your understanding of how we get to the felony. Now, we understand legally the fraud had to be committed to either conceal or to commit an offense. And I think the state is going with election interference. So how does paying off a porn star interfere with an election? And then isn't that unbelievably overbroad? Because isn't every action then interfering, putting up a billboard? Doesn't that interfere with the election? Anything then is interference. And in my world, that's way overbroad. So tell me how we get there. I still don't know. So I'm curious.
I'm not an attorney. I mean, I think that would be a question best answered by you, but I'll let Rachel take a stab at it.
But that's why I want to hear from you, from watching the media, what your understanding, because you're going around suggesting that it looks like he'll be convicted. But what then do you tell people as to how do we get to the felony?
I'm not suggesting that, Mark. I'm telling you what I've been hearing from different people.
Right.
But go on, Rachel. You want to answer that?
Yeah, I want to be clear too. I don't know if he's going to be convicted or not. Right. I know the evidence. When you get into court and every time we put a MAGA person, Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Donald Trump, whoever, into a courtroom setting where reality is reality and not Earth 2, they lose, right? But I'm not saying that will happen necessarily here. But in any case, my understanding of it is this, okay? You had the Access Hollywood tape come out. You have Hillary's emails, things. These things are happening together. So it's not in a vacuum. And they have another news story that's going to come out to reaffirm basically the allegations of this Access Hollywood, behavior issue with Stormy Daniels, right? So to me, what the election fraud, the felony part is the election interference, killing that story so that it doesn't go in. I mean, in a conspiracy too, if you listen to the testimony of David Pecker, this isn't some, hey, dude, I need a favor from you. A porn star wants to come out and it's going to bury me 2 weeks before election day because of this Access Hollywood tape, right? I mean, that would be enough, kind of, right? But it turns out they have this like longstanding you know, in and out system where where he's catching and killing, and not just that, planting stories about his opponents that are completely made up into the National Enquirer to help Trump. So I see it as that is a difference than putting up a billboard. It's all the intentional acts, that the individual component parts of that. But I'm not an attorney.
Said. No, well said. That was excellent.
Thank you.
I also see a billboard as transparent. And I see what they were doing as underhanded and hiding it from the American people. And I think these elections are supposed to be all about transparency as much as possible. And if he is influencing the outcome of an election through a fraudulent or surreptitious means, then, you know, I think that in a court of law, that is something that you should look at. But whether or not you know that is an actual crime or you can find him guilty on that, I don't know. I'm not an attorney.
I got it. No, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Mark, I have one more thing too. Like for me, you're right. Cohen's credibility is obviously the soft spot that I would exploit if I was a defense attorney. But here's where the rubber hits the road on Cohen, dude.
Cohen was under oath.
Gave him double the money on the payback so that he wouldn't pay taxes on the original 154, right? So like, it's just, he's just so screwed when he get down into the details of those receipts and those paybacks and the system that they devised to recover the money for Cohen.
Rachel, even, you know, Democrats and Republicans are divided on whether or not he is guilty. But I mean, despite all this political smoke, it seems that Americans are increasingly viewing this trial as legitimate. Okay, Mark, I know that, you know, you're asking where's the crime, but Americans are increasingly viewing this as legitimate. This is a court of public opinion. What should Americans take away from this trial, Rachel?
What they should take away from this trial is that, you know, we have a man who's got 91 indictments. We're about to go through the 34 first of those 91. And if we get convictions on some or all of those, we're going to be talking about a convicted felon who is going to be the Republican Party standard bearer, who is going to be competitive for the presidency, because we live in a country that isn't just popular vote, it's electoral college determinate. And so he's basically at 50-50 chance of returning to the White House, where he intends to use the power of the presidency to evade criminal prosecution on the other 62 charges, right? So we're really in this uncharted territory. It's a 5-alarm fire. And Don, that's why I'm so excited to be on the show. I hope people will check out my book, because when you talk about frustration with the Democratic strategy, if you read my book, you're going to find out the strategic shift the party's been making since 2022, which allowed us to blunt that red wave in 22, and which will give us hopefully the best odds of beating back Trumpism in the fall. And it is about understanding how voters respond. When we talk about people watching this trial, I really can't stress enough. We're talking about 10% of probably our adult population watching in any capacity, any of this, reading news reports. That's how low our information consumption rates have dropped in this country. Wow. A civic illiteracy crisis. And it's very important for people to understand how to meet the moment, given you have Americans that are getting most of their opinions off of social media very imagistically.
I'm telling you, it is. I think that part is much more pervasive and much stronger and bigger than people realize. I don't think that it's even being captured by the polling or the research, or there haven't been enough studies to see just how much people are influenced by social media and by digital media. I'm telling you, it's way, you know, I get more people say
the political science research, Don, you would just freak out if you saw it, right? Because anything fake will spread 1,000% faster, right?
It's crazy.
You know what I mean?
Well, and listen, when I was on CNN at the height, it was different. When I was in cable news, maybe like during COVID and George Floyd and during Trump. But I can't tell you how many people now, they don't say, you know, they watch you on CNN, they say, I saw you on this podcast. I saw you on that podcast. I saw you with these kids over here. And I'm like, wow, this is nuts. I don't think people are understanding what's happening here.
Right.
But Mark, let's get back to the subject at hand. You were talking about, I think this all rests, you know, in answer to your previous question about falsifying business records and falsifying business documents, because there's another poll. It is a YouGov and Yahoo News poll that discovered that while many Americans believe that Trump falsified business records, right? That's maybe one way that, you know, this is legal and legit if he is convicted. There shouldn't be any criminal prosecution. No, it shouldn't be any criminal repercussions, though. That is an odd place to be, right?
It could be. Aristotle defined justice as like cases being treated alike. Well, who do you compare this case to? You've never had, the former leader of the free world, whose behavior is analyzed so critically to then determine whether criminal charges should be brought under these types of circumstances. And if certain prosecutors wouldn't bring this case, then you start to go, well, wait, does this really belong in criminal court? Because it should be consistent. You murder, you rape, you do something like that, clear, every prosecutor is going to bring that charge. But this is starting off with, well, wait a second. Even on the Democratic side, you go, well, wait a second. We don't want, some prosecutors bringing this case and some not. So that's the first thing I question. And the second thing is, I'm still troubled. I wish we could see closing arguments. I will read a transcript of the prosecutor's closing argument to understand, and Rachel did an amazing job explaining how the path to a potential guilty verdict, in that he interfered with the election by paying off Stormy Daniels and killing these stories. Great. But then the question is, what does the jury instructions say to make sure that conduct like this isn't so overbroad? I mean, what makes it a crime versus a candidate just doing all that they can? And
was the answer not to the question that I was in, falsifying business records or business documents?
That's a problem. That's a misdemeanor. I almost concede that on the face of it, Cohen definitely committed a misdemeanor. The question becomes, the jury has to believe that Donald Trump was in on it, so that then he becomes a co-conspirator. So now, he's guilty of that misdemeanor.
Riddle me this. I know it was for different things. I think it was something to do with medallions for taxis and yada, yada, yada. But Michael Cohen went to prison because of these same events. Now, the charges may not be the same, but why should Michael Cohen go to prison and be found guilty and Donald Trump not be, when he was doing the work for Donald Trump?
The charges are not the same. Yeah. And I'm an ambassador of the criminal justice system for 32 years. And it's not about how I feel about Donald Trump, because most would think that somehow I'm a fan of his in terms of how I'm defending him. No, I just call it like I see it. I want every case to be brought with the presumption of innocence and enough evidence to prove. Because let me tell you something, we lower the burden of proof to get Trump. What's going to happen when someone you love, comes around the system? You don't want that burden of proof ever to be lowered. Right.
That's Trump's argument. That's Trump's argument. If they'll do it to me, they'll do it to you, and it's.
I mean, I have to say,
that's accurate.
Yeah.
I definitely want Trump. If I get arrested for something, Don, I'm straight up. I want Trump justice. I want to be able to threaten the judge, the witnesses, the jurors, all of it. I want to be able to do that unfettered with no fear of punishment. So that's where the problem comes when we start to create a legal exception. And Mark, I'm just not picking on you. You're reflective of what I would say is the broader commentariat view. Okay. Are we bending the law to get Donald Trump? And I'm of the argument, no, actually what we've been doing is bending the law to avoid getting Donald Trump.
Because Rachel, there are other people who have been charged with this crime and have faced the consequences. Yeah,
exactly. So the reason we're in this position with Donald Trump is we've had the two things come together, right? A system that evolved a norm of non-prosecution for the president, like over 50 years, a DOJ norm. Okay. And number two, a man willing to exploit it to its fullest capabilities, right? And what we have found is, yes, you can hear MAGA people complaining and bitching all the time about Trump being hounded by the criminal justice system, but there's the other half of America who says, I have to pay my taxes. Mm-hmm. I have to respond to jury summons. I can't go to the judge and tell him that he's, go attack his daughter and try to turn a mob against their daughter, right? So there is this perception that Donald Trump is getting special treatment coming from the other middle America, not from the MAGA people. And I do think it's incredibly dangerous. So, Mark, I do appreciate what you're arguing. Are we going to, use this argument, slippery slope, and, could this apply to other things where you're trying to influence election outcomes? But at the end of the day, the alternative is to carve out a special legal protection for Donald Trump based on that status of former president.
I'm not a fan of that either. I wouldn't do that. Hey, and just so we're clear, if somebody falsifies business records, I don't care who you are, you should face potential criminal charges. Again, the component that I'm having a challenge with, because I get that first part, is just what is interference with an election. What is that definition?
I would argue it's
interference versus
making
influence.
a huge payment and hiding it from your FEC records, right? Because at the end of the day, the reason they bring Cohen in, right, and have him pay the payment and then repay him double the amount is they don't want to fill out a form that says I spent $140K to whatever her name was, Stormy Daniels, her real name, right? Because they knew if somebody was looking through that FEC report, they were going to see that and put 2 and 2 together, right? So that's where the crime comes from. That reporting isn't just about the money scheme that they had wasn't just about, evading some business records. It was about evading campaign finance disclosures that would have been, probably found by people like Don.
Well, this is, you said what I said, but much more articulately, because you said, I said doing it surreptitiously, right?
Right.
Without knowledge from the public, but also you do have to put it on your FEC filing what it is. Now, Donald Trump's argument is that we put it there, but we put it there as a legal expense. They didn't explicitly say what it's for. So, Mark, I understand.
Paying off porn star, isn't on the form or something that would have been advised by his attorney, So is it really, it should have been a campaign expense? I would argue it's less of a campaign expense and more of legal fees, even though I don't know that legal fees fits either. So It just starts to become very murky. That's all.
Okay. And by the way, Stephanie Clifford is Stormy Daniels' real name. Okay. So I just listen. How then, with all of this? I mean, it's, as you said, Mark, you believe it sets a dangerous precedent here. So I'm wondering, does a jury take all of that in when they are deciding? And I'm sure the lawyers, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, are going to talk about no one is really charged for this, even though they are. They're going to make that argument. So the jury during deliberations, set to begin, soon, how long do you expect it to take? And are they going to think about those things? Who's been charged with this, who's not, et cetera? Okay.
So anyone who tells you that they know how long it's going to take, right? They're being intellectually dishonest. Jurors do whatever they want. I had a huge high profile case. I literally asked for 5 minutes. I said, all you have to do is pick a 4-person. You come out and you say they didn't meet their burden. They kept me in torture for 4 days before they finally acquitted my client. It was brutal. Okay. So no one knows. If you're asking me, you have a gun to my head, I say by Friday, because jurors would rather probably not come back from the weekend. They're hearing closing arguments today. They're going to be charged with the law today, most likely. He's off Wednesday. They come back, deliberate a full day Thursday, a full day Friday, and maybe Friday afternoon, if I'm guessing. Okay. And then the next question was, what do they consider? The answer is whatever the hell they want. What goes on back there? Listen, I've been trying cases for 32 years. Early in my career, my first federal trial, this is federal court. The jurors were deliberating hours, and finally they had a note. We all come back to the courtroom. This note is going to tell us what they're thinking. Here we go. And the note was, what dose, and they spelled does, D-O-S-E, unanimous, instead of unanimous, unanimous means. 12 people couldn't determine what unanimous meant, and the judge had just instructed them on what it was.
Wow.
I say... now, this is a smarter jury. There's a lot of professionals, 2 lawyers.
2 attorneys,
I don't expect questions like that, but you never know what jurors are going to do or think or say.
Oh, boy. So what do you think? What do you think of the verdict? Any predictions? You want to make one, Mark?
Misdemeanor. I don't know that we get to the felony. I still don't even see the path there. I don't.
Okay. Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I would be surprised if he comes back acquitted, guys, because, here's the problem again. It's just there's so much receipt evidence that Michael Cohen is saying, Michael Cohen is untrustworthy, obviously, as a witness, easy to pick apart. But the problem is he's got receipts, right? Like all kinds of receipts. And so my expectation is continued decimation of MAGA reality in courtrooms, because you can't, that's why they're so frustrated. Steve Bannon, what's his argument? I couldn't make the arguments I wanted to make. Well, that's because they're completely made up. Okay. And you have to have real evidence in a real courtroom. So I'm convinced that the hard part with Donald Trump was getting people to stop giving him a special status that would create a presidency in this country. It would be immune and, able to do whatever it wants to the citizens because it's been told it's basically immune from legal prosecution. And I think that we're going to see probably some level of accountability come out of this case. The
political-
other
Don,
ones I feel very confident about.
Yeah,
Don,
quickly,
can
Mark,
I tell you where
to get something else.
I want to tell you where I think the defense screwed up big time. I never would have done this. Okay. To me, the biggest screw up was you don't concede that he had the affair with Stormy Daniels, because obviously your client wouldn't want that. And what you do is you say, we are absolutely not going to address that and turn this case into a whole nother freak show, because they turned it into that. By saying in opening statements the affair didn't happen, it then allowed the judge to permit all those details. And now everyone knows he had that affair with Stormy Daniels, right?
Most people know before, though, Mark. I mean,
what?
I mean, come on.
Every sane person.
Why does the defense take on that battle? It opened up the door to graphic detail of a president in a posing position in his boxers in a hotel room. Did he wear a condom? Did he not? Oh, we now know that he did. Okay. I don't need those details. And but that came out. That came out
I know.
in a hearing trial, in a fraud trial. That should never have happened. And now his credibility suffers, and the jurors are analyzing his credibility. That was a horrible move on their part.
Yeah, and then I have to say, I thought the most damaging part is the Pecker testimony, because here's got to assume that there are some
literally the Pecker
people
testimony
on this jury, right? And then they
which Pecker? Are you talking about the guy who testified? All right.
Yeah, David Pecker, or the Pecker testimony. You boys.
That came up. It came up in court. I mean, come on. It's part of it, Rachel. I mean,
it came up. Really, Don? It came up. Come on, Don. Come on, Don. Please, Don. Now we're hitting an all-time low here. Come on.
We're supposed to believe it came up without the help of Viagra, too, huh? I don't think so, dude. I don't think so.
Guys.
No matter how much Time Magazine spanking happened there, Here's the point, though. I mean, that testimony from Pecker was so damaging because it allowed the jury, to see how Trump manipulates media for terror. I mean, not just about hiding the story. It was the other stuff, the stuff that Pecker testified about, Ted Cruz and all of this. And you could not have asked for a worse way to go into that criminal trial than that Pecker kickoff. And that's why I assume the prosecution chose it to that way. Brilliant legal move. And then, as Mark pointed out, the biggest mistake they made was contesting the affair. As soon as they did that, they opened up the door to all that testimony. And of course, they closed it off by putting what's his name on the stand. And I'm sure that Trump pushed that. What was his name? Oh, my gosh, the guy who closed out.
Costello.
Costello.
Yeah.
Oh,
and I'm sure
you guys are acting like you're on mushrooms. Haha. See if you get that one. Okay. So
Alvis and Costello.
We know about that. Okay. Can we move on now?
Yeah, we sure can.
I just want to know from you, Rachel, do you think it was smart for the most part, the Biden administration, I should say the Biden campaign, has not really campaigned on this trial? Do you think that's a smart move?
Oh, I think it was not smart. I think that they have to understand, it's all sensationalism. You guys ever seen the movie Chicago, the musical Chicago?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's nothing more right than what that guy, you got to razzle dazzle. Okay. And so today they made the decision to not only go to the court in New York, they're going to be there. They're bringing Robert De Niro with them, our America's favorite TV mobster, to call out our mobster president. And they have to do it. I mean, you have to do the silly stuff. If we cannot.
What if they do all of that and then he's found innocent? That's what are not guilty. But here's the thing. Okay, I get it. But why are they so buttoned up? I asked this to a political, not really a political strategist, but someone who has been speaking to the White House and actually is running for office. And I said, why are they so buttoned up? There's no mistake that they can make. There's nothing they can do to outdo what Donald Trump is accused of and his behavior. Nothing. Right. So why are the Democrats, why is the campaign and the administration, why are they so buttoned up? Why aren't they razzle dazzling?
Yeah, I mean, can I give you guys just a little? I mean, here's what I will tell you. Like the Biden, I mean, you may not see it. I don't know exactly where you're based on, but I'm guessing it's
New
somewhere
York.
where you're not
I'm in New York.
seeing a lot of political ads, right?
Yeah.
So today's advertising system, it follows the individual through the digital space. Okay, so you may never get an ad, but that doesn't mean that the campaign's not doing that. The strategy from the Biden team is very clear. From the top down, they're going to be running very hard on MAGA extremism, threat to democracy, and what that means for average people. You don't have Social Security in a system where you don't have democratic accountability. They steal your money. They, everything's corrupt, blah, blah, blah. So I think the Biden campaign is well positioned. Where I am worried about is the rest of the swing ballot map. That's where I'm focused on, making sure from the state ledge to the House to the Senate to the gov races that are going to be running underneath down ballot from Biden, they are also pounding this theme. And the reason we have to pound it, guys, as Don's found out in his post CNN career, no one watches cable news. Okay. The world has moved into YouTube, into Riverside and all these other things. And you have to be in that space. And that's where the eyeballs are. Follow the eyeballs. And I think the Biden campaign, though you may not see it, understands it. The question is, does the John Tester campaign get that? Does the Sherrod Brown campaign get it? Does the Debbie Marcellus Powell campaign in Florida get it? Because they better get it if we're going to stop fascism this fall.
Are you in contact with him?
I'm in contact with a lot of people.
Okay. Can you please tell them, and I'm totally serious, and I'm going to send a note to the White House as well. They need to do a streaming debate. They really do.
They need to do a what?
A debate on streaming. They need to do YouTube debate.
Yes, they do. A YouTube debate. That would be great.
YouTube debate, and they need to use the people who are part of the streaming, and it can be a number of different people. It just doesn't have to be 2 or 3 people. It can be a number of different people that they're taking questions from, and it doesn't have to be a traditional debate. It can be something that's more akin to what's going on, and it should be new and different and fresh. And I think if the Biden administration did that, they would really get their point across, because on these platforms that I go on, conservatives have a leg up. Conservatives got to this space first, and they are really owning it for the most part. There are centrist and liberal folks on YouTube and on streaming, but they don't have as big a footprint as conservatives, right? And for people who don't really like to deal in facts. So that is my advice. Can we move on and talk about something else? Okay, Mark, I want to talk about a different case. The video from Diddy Combs, the rapper, physically assaulting his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. It was leaked, I think it was last week or the week before. The week before, the video, obviously remarkably damning, latest in a long string of legal woes for him. What do you make of the video, and what do you think happens? I mean, don't forget, his home was raided and he's not even there, and his kids were taken, into custody for a while, or apprehended. I'm not sure if they were arrested, but what do you make of the video, and what do you think this is all about?
All right. Obviously, it's abhorrent behavior, and he needed to go and apologize. There's nothing they can do in terms of criminal charges. The statute of limitations ran a while ago, so nothing new there. I think that it hurts his credibility as the federal charges will come to fruition. They don't get promoted based on how many people they let go. Those agents went in there because they're building a case, and that's going to be forthcoming. And the fact that now you've got public opinion way in support of the prosecution more than ever, because it's rare to actually see someone commit these abhorrent acts, on video. So now now there would be a lot more support for allegations made against him by prosecutors. And I think it's also going to affect the jury pool, because, who hasn't seen it?
2 of his homes were raided in March, Mark, and he's facing a number of other, I would admit, sticky legal allegations, or these, again, allegations, to suggest there's potentially something larger here, like maybe sex trafficking, an investigation there. Do you see that with the tactics of the investigators and police?
Yeah, the agents who went in are from that unit that would typically bring those charges. We know what people have been alleging in different civil complaints. It would not surprise me if we saw those types of charges fairly soon.
Yeah. There was another accuser has come forward to alleging widespread sexual abuse as well. That's a total of 7 people, Mark. I mean, Wow.
Doesn't mean he's guilty of all those.
It
I am a defense lawyer, and I've represented a lot of high-profile folks, and people come out of the woodwork and they want their cash grab because they think they can get one. So I would look at each case individually. Obviously, we start off, there's a lot of smoke already because of this video that came out.
Do you think you think it's going to be an investigation, a sex trafficking investigation, right? Is that what you said? Okay.
Yeah.
And these other charges, right? Because there are a number of people who are coming forward. And, we discussed this last week. Where do you go to get your credibility back after these charges have been, levied against you? Now, what happened on videotape, it's obvious. She was abused, physically abused. But others, it's not so clear. And so, as you say, it should be, each case should be handled individually, but that tape doesn't help him with any other case that comes forward.
You are correct. I mean, listen, if there's an actual trial, that tape I would move to exclude in limine, meaning in advance. Nobody should mention it. Nobody should talk about it because it's a separate act. What's that? It's
too prejudicial, or you think?
Oh yeah, I would say. Let's say he's charged with sex trafficking. Okay, I guess there's some relevance. You put everything on the 403 balance scale. On one side, okay, the prosecutors think it might come into evidence for some probative reason, but then the prejudicial effect, meaning why it would be so harmful. People will immediately conclude he's a man of horrible character, and thus he must have done, whatever it is, the sex trafficking or whatever they're going to claim, and that's just not fair. Mm-hmm. And while you, again, lower the burden, because who gives a what about Diddy, because look who he is. No. It's about every other defendant in the system where that type of bad character evidence shouldn't come in unless they meet a very high burden. And I don't think that they will, because I don't think him hitting an ex-girlfriend can plausibly be analogized to what needs to be proven in a sex trafficking case. I think those are two different cases.
Well, listen, he lives in California, right? But he's already in Miami now. Do you think he'll flee the country?
I don't think so. I mean, it would be very easy to find him. And then the worst part about it is his chances of getting out on bond would be extremely low and remote. At least he'll have the ability to face the charges, go in, work out a reasonable bond, and then hopefully be acquitted. But if he flees, they'll catch him most likely. He's very recognizable. No, I don't think he'll flee.
Well, I mean, if he goes to Bali, others have, and he stays there, I don't know if he ever comes back. I'm just saying. Or Bali.
That's a possibility too.
That's a possibility. Sure. Rachel, listen, I know that this isn't your, bailiwick, but public opinion. Can one come back from something like this?
I mean, there is still a contingent of people that are loyal to Bill Cosby, and I'm an 80s kid, so I grew up with Cosby. I understand.
He isn't quite making a comeback, though.
No, but there's still, when you look at public opinion, there is still a chunk of people. So celebrity just gives you an immunity. That's what Donald Trump's entire thing. You could take away everything that has happened since he came down that golden escalator has been contingent, not on his political celebrity, but his Hollywood celebrity, right? And there's a chunk of fans that will forgive Diddy. I am sure of it. Mm-hmm.
Even with that tape. Yikes, hard to believe. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. Good luck. We'll see if your predictions come true very shortly. Thanks for watching The Don Lemon Show. Make sure you click on the image in the top right to subscribe to my channel and the thumbnail in the bottom right to watch more content from my show. And I'll see you next time.